Hello and welcome to Bunny Hop. My name is George Weedman and I have with me here the prolific Chris Avellone. Could you quickly give us a brief rundown of who you are and why you're prolific?
I'm Chris Avellone, creative director of Obsidian Entertainment. I've been working in RPGs for what feels like way too many years. And my current projects are Project Eternity at Obsidian and Torment, Tides of Numenera at inXile Entertainment.
And you're also doing Wasteland 2, right?
Actually, Wasteland 2 finished up last year. I'm just doing the novella writing for it now, but my work on that is actually complete, and it's shaping up to be pretty awesome. I actually have a demo that I'm showing on Monday, so I'm very excited about that.
I actually wanted to ask, like in between all these crowdsourced projects that you're working on, is that a bigger or a smaller workload than what you're used to under like a more traditional publisher model?
It's about the same. The only difference is the amount of production work involved with a more classic publisher model usually ends up being more, but with Eternity and Torment and Wasteland 2, a lot of the producer pressure has gone away and people are actually just approaching the game in the order that they feel like doing the design makes sense. So that's actually been kind of a relief and a lot less stressful. So the amount of work might actually be the same, but the feel of the environment is a lot different. It's a lot more casual and relaxed, and to be honest, a lot more creative.
Huh. So even though it's the same amount of work, it's like less stressful work?
Yeah, dealing with the players and the backers who actually understand your game, or like bouncing ideas off of them, or just with the crew, as opposed to delivering, the publisher milestones, is a lot different, and it's just a lot nicer.
So I also wanted to ask, one of the stretch goals for Project Eternity was to get Chris Avellone to play Arcanum.
Yes.
And so now there's like 5 hours of Chris Avellone playing Arcanum.
And I'm not done yet. I actually did want to go back and do, because people were telling me that I should do a stupid playthrough, and I believe that there was one other request that I wanted to try out, because it's obvious the amount of reactivity in Arcanum. There's a lot to play around with there, so I actually wanted to see the whole range of that stuff. But yeah, I still got quite a few more hours to go, and even though I find the interface for Arcanum incredibly frustrating, I think it's really beautiful, but design-wise, I think it's terrible. I really enjoying the world, I'm enjoying the conversations, I'm enjoying the quests, and I think Troika is to be commended for that entire world setup that they did.
And what about like the Let's Play format on YouTube? Does that feel weird?
Yeah, it's a little weird. Like part of me wonders, so I actually asked the community if it'd be better if, I just did a blog critique breakdown of Arcanum from an old school RPG perspective in terms of what I feel they got right and what I feel like it didn't go so well. So I might actually end up doing that and then just posting that on a blog, but still doing the Let's Play too. The important thing is I want to make sure that, for the backers that push that stretch goal, I want to make sure that we're delivering on our promise with that stuff. So I want to get the whole range of stuff. So even if it requires a bit more work, I want to make sure that people that actually invested the money in it are actually getting their money's worth.
Yeah. So you also got into video gaming from Tabletop.
Yep.
Or from D&D like campaigns, other RPGs too. And I was wondering, how different is it writing for and designing for video gaming versus tabletop gaming?
So the interesting thing is actually the details you have to put in the design are a lot different. Even when doing tabletop gaming, laying out every specific part of the dungeon, putting all the loot placement everywhere, that's a lot of work. But for a video game, you have to do even more than that. If you set up a town with NPCs, for New Vegas, for example, you have to know what every single NPC in that town does from hour to hour. You have to know what every single NPC is carrying at each time, what their schedules are, what the quests are, and the amount of detail you have to put into a game. You can't leave anything to chance. With a tabletop game, you can improv a little bit and do the GM mode where you're okay, well the players chose to do that, so I can kind of roll with that and do some random dice rolls. But with a game, you have to have answered all those questions beforehand, otherwise it just creates problems.
Do you see more or less people than when you were getting in going from tabletop to video gaming?
It feels like less because a lot of the disciplines that I see in the design department come from things like level design in either Unreal or Unity or any of a number of different editor packages, as opposed to people that are actually sat around a table and actually just did a D&D session. So even though I sometimes see narrative designers that come from tabletop gaming, a lot of the level designers and system designers I work with actually have gotten their start through more things like just playing around with editors, playing around with mods, as opposed to actually being involved with tabletop gaming. Although there are some that do that, largely they seem to come from other areas.
And how do you feel about user-created mods in your games? Like
I love it.
New Vegas especially.
I think if anything adds more life to a project, it's seeing what the community comes up with the editor tools. I think, and actually that ended up being a big learning experience for us for both Neverwinter and for New Vegas. Like when we were doing the DLC content for New Vegas, when we were doing Old World Blues, we actually went to the Fallout Nexus and we're like, what are people missing about New Vegas that they're creating a lot of mods for? And we went through that entire list and we're like, everyone seems to be making a home base. Like, okay, well maybe people didn't feel that the base in New Vegas was enough. So is there any way we can do a DLC pack that makes a really great base that apparently people are missing or want? So we ended up making that a big core component of Old World Blues, and I think that went over really well. And then it ends up being good for the Xbox and PS, PlayStation users, because they don't usually have access to mods, but we're able to actually use that DLC content to provide them with a cooler base as well. So that actually all worked out. And seeing what the mod community comes up with is just always really exciting. I feel like it adds a lot more life to the project. And I think with Shadowrun Returns, for example, like I'm enjoying the original campaign, but I'm really anxious to also see what mods they also come out with for that. Like it feels like it just adds a lot of life and breath to the game. So I'm really excited about that.
Yeah. I know a lot of developers see it as kind of decreasing the sequel potential or cheapening the brand. I think is a term that
I'm not sure I agree with that.
That's happened before. Yeah, I was about to ask. Do you agree with that?
Not in the slightest.
Beautiful.
No way.
Right. And also, do you think RPGs have become simpler or more complex nowadays compared to late 90s?
Depends on the RPG, but I think that when you're delivering an RPG across multiple platforms, there's a lot of compromises that take place in the system mechanics just because the interface changes with whether it's a controller or a keyboard. We know that with Project Eternity, because it's PC focused, Windows focused, because we have that keyboard and all the options that are present versus a handheld controller, the amount of input that we can allow the players to have and the mouse control we can allow them to have allows for much different mechanics than you could for, say, like a multi-console title where you have to make sure you scale down a lot of the inputs and make sure that you can only have 2 NPCs following you at a time, and usually they have their own AI that's governing their behavior, because trying to control a party with a controller is actually really, really difficult. So I know with Eternity, having that PC focus has been really good for us in terms of widening the system range that we feel we can give the players. So that's actually been pretty good.
Why do you think so many gamers, with all the success you've had kickstarting these projects, why do you think so many gamers want to see a return to nostalgic PC games?
Because they just really liked it. I think, and we really liked making it, and they really liked playing it, and they're like, you know what, there is no Baldur's Gate out there. And we're like, well, we would love to make a Baldur's Gate. How do you guys feel about that? They're like, we feel pretty strongly about it. So it worked out.
Hole that needs filling.
Yes, absolutely.
I guess another thing I wanted to ask in the same vein is, why do you think PC RPGs have kind of decreased in popularity since then? I don't know, economic or social?
I just don't think publishers are interested in the return on investment for PC RPGs. I think when it comes, if we were doing a pitch for an old school Windows-based RPG that was isometric view, not many publishers would want to get behind a project like that, because even though Project Eternity has a good number of backers, that number of backers is nothing compared to the numbers that a publisher is hoping for when they release an RPG. So our backer number is actually kind of a drop in the bucket compared to what they're hoping to shoot for. So it's actually not worth their time to invest in a project like that. At least a lot of the publishers that we talk to, some of the smaller publishers, however, are like, for that price point, it does seem like there's interest in that. Maybe that will work out for us, but it all depends. But I think it's mostly just economics.
For those smaller budgets you're doing on the crowdsourced projects, do you have to make any compromises?
Those compromises usually come when we're establishing the stretch goals and when we're setting up the scope for the project initially, because what you don't want to do with a Kickstarter is set up the stretch goals without understanding all the financial costs associated with, okay, well, if you have 2 cities, or if you're writing 2 additional companions, how much time does that take a narrative designer? What's the scripting involved with that? What's the testing time involved with that? The advantage we had going into Eternity is because a lot of us were from Black Isle. We'd already done 4 or 5 Infinity Engine games we understand the process of how long it takes to design elements like that, implement those characters. So we had that advantage going into it. So that was kind of nice.
Are you allowed to just yet tell us what some of the major themes of Project Eternity's story are going to be?
I wish. So there's a few things that so first off, there's three ways the design breaks down in terms of like backer collaboration. One is there's a lot of design elements that we freely share with the community and iterate back and forth with them. There are elements about the design where we kind of stick to our guns and explain why we're implementing a feature a certain way, whether we want it to feel really Infinity Engine, and here's what Infinity Engine means to us. And when our critiques are really well thought out and explained like that, we find a lot of backers understand where we're coming from, and that helps. But when it comes to the storyline, our feeling is that's probably something that we want to keep pretty close to the chest, in the sense that if we talk too much about the storyline now, we don't want to disappoint the players or ruin their experience for later when they actually play the game. But the story is shaping up really well. Eric Fenstermaker, who did a lot of the writing for Fallout New Vegas, he did a pass of the storyline. Then Josh Sawyer did another pass. Then Eric did the sort of final sort of player experience pass, and it's actually shaping up really, really well.
You know, I've always wondered how video game writers divide up the task of writing a whole game. Like, I know a lot of time projects will have a particular writer working on a particular mission. Is that how you guys are handling Eternity and Wasteland?
Generally, we try to assign a creative lead to each one of our projects at Obsidian, and that person is responsible for writing the story, carrying the torch for the story, making sure all the major themes are being explored, the companions are reinforcing that theme. And then once they have that entire narrative arc set up for the game, they actually end up carving out pieces of that and assigning it to individual designers. So like for New Vegas, for example, you know, specific designers would get specific companions that a creative lead had already set up. So like, hey, you get Lily, like, hey, you get Rose of Sharon Cassidy, and they actually delegate those tasks out, let the writers run with those characters, and then the creative lead comes back, checks them to make sure they fit in with the game, like the themes are actually properly being explored. They start doing editing pass if necessary. So that's kind of how the workload breaks down.
So the individual writers are kind of like underneath the creative lead?
Yeah, and I think BioWare is actually structured much the same way.
One other thing I wanted to wonder, and this is also kind of non sequitur, is what's going on with the South Park RPG these days?
If I could talk about the South Park game, I would. But it's basically just like playing the show, and it's a lot of fun. And when we have focus testers come in, we hear a lot of laughter from the focus test room.
Well, that's good news.
So apparently, because South Park is occasionally funny. It's a funny show. So apparently, we're delivering on that.
Cool. At last year's panel, I remember one question that really stuck out to me that you answered. You said you liked to process negativity into writing for your project. Specifically, how you hated Star Wars is what happened when you were writing KOTOR 2. I was wondering how you channel negative energy into a constructive, productive project.
So it happened with two projects. One was Planescape, where I took everything I hated about RPGs and then tried to find a way to turn it on its head and make it palatable again. And Planescape was a different beast. But with Star Wars, and I've said this before, when we initially had the opportunity to do Star Wars, I wasn't really that excited about it. I'm like, Star Wars. But then so I'm like, you know what? It's, let me approach this. Let me take another run at it. I love Star Wars, when I was growing up. What grabbed me about it? So, I watched all the films, started immersing myself in the graphic novels and the novels and whatever I could get my hands on. And all I did was even though I have issues with this universe, maybe working on this game as a way to explore what those issues are and what my questions are about it. So I'm like, so here's my issues with the Force. I don't like these elements of the Force and how they tie the Star Wars universe together. Why don't I have a companion or an overlying theme that directly addresses those questions and challenges the player with those questions? And I think that ended up being interesting for players going through the game because that was sort of a different approach and perspective of the Force they weren't necessarily used to from the movies and other games in the line. And I like to think that they were able to leave the game with those questions and think about it some more. But when it came to negativity, I guess those just become opportunities to sort of challenge the paper. So hopefully it went over well. If not,
no, it did. It's a really cool story, and I think that might actually be kind of the reason why is how it addresses things that your typical Star Wars story doesn't. The morality of it is a lot more grayer. It's kind of a sinister overtone and a really weird paternal character who is great.
Well, I always actually had a little bit of sympathy for Palpatine because obviously the way Lucas set it up is the Republic's a big mess, and the Jedi are like so full of themselves, and like he just wants order in the galaxy, and ultimately that's what the Sith are after. They want things to run well, and to an extent you can kind of understand that. So I'm like, okay, well, there are elements about like choosing the dark path in Star Wars that I think you can actually like make more interesting than just hey, I'm a psychotic dick, or like I just kill everybody. Like those are just dumb elements to explore about
binary.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. So like, but I feel like Palpatine was a character that actually tried to at least on some level explore more of what evil was about. When in fact all he wanted was order and things to run smoothly and control. Like okay, well to an extent that's a little bit more interesting than than being psychotic.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you, man. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Yeah. Sweet.